Okay, now let's look at the definition of a complex number. If it is in the form of z equivalent to a plus bi, we can say that a here is, we call it the real part, and b here we call it the imaginary part. Now, imaginary part always attached to the I, which is imaginary number. Now, the a and b is actually the element of the real number. Okay, now if you recall, the properties of I, I've mentioned before, I is equivalent to square root -1 and I square is equivalent to -1. Let's look at a few examples on the properties of I. If they ask you to simplify these three things, okay, the first one, let's look at this. Square root of -2. So what we can do first is that we separate the square root of -1 as such using the properties of square root A multiplied by B equivalent to square root A multiplied by square root B. Okay, so now let's look at this. If the first one, square root -2, we can actually separate it as such, this -1 multiplied by 2. And then using the properties, we can say that square root -1, you can multiply by square root 2. Which give us square root -1 is equivalent to I, and square root 2, we just leave it as a radical form, square root 2. But again, we rearrange as such. In a complex number, we have the B, which is square root 2 at the front, and I at the back. So you're going to have this. Are you okay? Now let's look at the second one. If we have the square root -4. If we have the square root -4, again what we can do is we separate it into -1 multiplied by 4. As such, this one you can rewrite square root 4 multiplied by square root -1. So square root 4 we can simplify as such, we're going to get 2, and square root -1 we will get I. So you will get your answer 2I. Okay, and the last one, if we have square root -9. So again, what we can do is we separate the 9 multiplied by -1, and then we're going to have square root 9 multiplied by square root -1, which give us this is 3, and this is I. So your answer would be 3I, which is nicer number. Are you okay?